I'm really a guy who lives out in the woods. Don't have any of those special fancy titles. But I am a father, and I want my children to live in a Christian nation. And I want my children to live in a Christian nation.
Welcome back to the Lone Bulwark. Today I have a special guest. I have someone you are familiar with. So Thomas Acord is here, and we are going to talk about courage. So courage is the topic for today. And this is part of a series that we have been covering on Ars Politica, which is our show we normally do together. And I don't know what that is, but he's some
Aristotle.
Aristotle, there you go. Yeah, we're going through the virtues and the emotions and other things. We covered empathy with the review of Joe Rigney's book, The Sin of Empathy, which I think will be available soon. Or actually, by the time this comes out, it should be available. And then we covered anger. And so we're going to cover all these different emotions and different virtues. So if you want to go there, if you want to hear those episodes, you have to go to thelonebulwark.supercast.com, where you can subscribe for a few dollars and get all that content, which we put a lot of work into making, and we hope that you enjoy them. And we orient these so that people can learn and that we can, in a way, grow together. And process of learning. A lot of this stuff that we talk about, we actually learned later in life, and our kids are learning these things as they, at a much younger age. But most people didn't learn this stuff. And so we want to teach the sort of classical ideas that have been lost. And so that's what we're all about.
Right.
And so let's just get into it. So we've got courage. Courage is something that's been discussed a long time. It seems that it's an obvious virtue for civil society because there are various things to fear, and things that you fear you often have to confront and destroy. But it rises up a sort of emotion of fear that you have to overcome, but also it signals to you that there's danger. So there's good in that, and yet it's often something you have to overcome or control or direct such that you can achieve a good. And that good can be a civil good. It could be the good of you fighting for your homeland in battle. It could be you standing up in the face of injustice to confront that injustice. It could be you being killed for your faith. That could also be a matter of courage. So there's a theological aspect to this. There's a political aspect to this, and of course all sorts of other aspects as well. So. Thomas, do you want to kind of start off with maybe a kind of a working definition?
Sure. So there's a few different definitions, and one that I like is that fortitude or courage, it presupposes vulnerability. So it's something that you mentioned, Stephen. You have to be afraid for this to happen, for you to be courageous. Like there's an idea, can angels be courageous? Well, you might think, yeah, look at Michael, the archangel fighting Satan. That's courageous. That takes a lot of you have to be actually able to be harmed. So that's the Western classical requirement. You have to be vulnerable. You have to have some at least the ability to be infirm or injured or something like this. And so when you face that fear that arises from this ability to be harmed, and yet you overcome the fear, or you continue to act toward the good. That's courage. That's fortitude. So there's several elements here, and I get this from Aristotle, and I also read a few other sources on this recently. So you're able to be harmed. That's one, like by your constitution. So you're not an angel. You're not a God. So this brings up an interesting question. Can God have courage? And immediately you might think, no. Well, Jesus became incarnate. So Jesus, as a man, could be harmed. He could suffer harm. He can suffer injury. And yet in that moment when he's being persecuted or he's being arrested and he's being with the crown of thorns and so on and so forth on the cross, he is doing something that's moving toward the good. In this instance, obeying his Father, sacrificing himself for our sins. This is obviously good. That's courage. But prior to that, could he have suffered harm? Could he have, and therefore could he have shown courage? Well, we can discuss that more, but humans uniquely are able to show courage. Like a dog, for instance, can suffer harm and still move forward to do something, but is it doing something that's morally good? Like, can a dog be morally good? Not according to basically Western tradition, because a dog is not rational. Now, a dog can do something that's materially good. It can defend its master. The dog has some virtues and qualities according to its stature, its nature, but not in the sense of human virtue. So humans uniquely can have courage because we can suffer harm in the achievement of some good. And that's the other part of this definition. You have to be moving toward good. So, for instance, a pirate or a thief or a robber or somebody who does something that's daring, that risks his life, you might think, wow, that's courage. No, not in this classical Western sense, because he's not moving toward justice, righteousness, goodness. And these are all proper terms that are defined from everybody, really. But they're proper terms that I'm using here. So not just doing something that's daring or requires risk. Like I snowboard a lot when I have the free time now, and I do a lot of risky things on the slope. Take big jumps, I jump off of small cliffs and things. And that's putting myself in the way of harm. But am I doing something that's moving toward good, or something that's justice, like achieving justice for others? And that's another element here too. You have to be able to, or you have to be moving toward doing something good, not just for yourself, but for others. So if I'm just boasting in my strength, it's not really courage. If I'm being heedless of injury, that's also not courage. So if I'm drunk, or if I'm on drugs, or if I'm just out of my mind hallucinating and I go and do something that's really, really bold and puts myself in the way of harm, well, I'm not in my right mind. So do you see, courage has to be led by reason. And so there's all kinds of elements here. You may think initially, like, I know what courage is. Courage is when the guys in World War II stormed the beaches of Normandy. That's courageous. It's very courageous. But there are elements to it. Okay, so again, I think a broad definition, I'm kind of getting away and illustrating, but it's fortitude presupposes vulnerability in the achievement of some good. So you're putting yourself in harm's way. You're suffering injury in the achievement of some good. And that's essentially me summarizing Aristotle. It's also coming from Joseph Piper. Joseph Piper, who wrote the Four Cardinal Virtues.
Yeah, I mean, we should mention, it is one of the four cardinal virtues. And
yeah, it's called fortitude in that book.
Fortitude from Latin. And in Greek, it's Andrea, as you find in Aristotle. Mm-hmm. One thing you're saying is that it basically involves choice. So there's a moral choice involved. So you could be, we'll get to the mean, the kind of golden mean thing in Aristotle, but there's a sense that, like, you could be around, like in the military, you could be with someone who has the appearance of courage, and perhaps that person would be right next to you in charging the machine gun in front of you. And yet that person, if he's doing it simply by a sort of instinct, it's kind of like an animal. Like you mentioned animals, like if an animal just kind of does things by instinct, there's no moral choice involved. But if someone is there's no moral virtue, even though the action itself outwardly would be good, if you're simply doing it by a sort of mindless instinct, there's no actual moral virtue there. So it has to be a confrontation of danger. There has to be an element of fear, some way that you can be harmed, And so there's a moral choice involved, whether you can be courageous or cowardly. And as you said, it has to be for something that is good. An example I thought of for it being kind of good or bad was, many people might remember this. Probably some people don't know this, but most people know, I guess, like who Bill Maher is. Bill Maher is that left-wing comedian. I don't think he's very funny. He's never been funny, but he's always had a show for a long time, various shows. And now after 9/11, he made a very controversial remark, because after 9/11, people were saying how the terrorists were cowardly, like this cowardly act of terrorism. And he went on there and he said, well, no, they flew a plane into the building and killed themselves. That's not cowardly. There was, I don't know if he said they are courageous, but he was kind of implying with the contrary, basically that it is a courageous act to fly a group of people unjustly into a building. And actually, like, according to our definition of courage, or the traditional definition of courage, what they did was not courageous at all, to fly to kill hundreds of people by flying into a building. And then, of course, the thousands that were killed from the buildings fell. That was not a courageous act. Now, I guess we could debate whether it was reckless or it was cowardly. I think cowardly probably is more fitting for that. Even though in a way you did have to overcome fear, they overcame fear in an act of extreme injustice. And so that would not actually count as courage, and whatever. I don't know if we want to talk about what that would be, but cowardice is probably a better, if not probably slightly inadequate, description of that sort of act. So anyway, Bill Maher lost his show. It was like an HBO show, or actually I think it was a cable show, and now he's on HBO. But that happened over almost 25 years ago now. But anyway, so I think that's an act, but it's a matter of choice, a moral choice for the good. And we should mention explicitly the sort of mean, the way that Aristotle approaches most of the virtues, not all the virtues, but for like justice doesn't really work in this way. But in terms of the mean would be that there's two excesses. There's an excess, let's say left and right, not politically, but left and right. On one side, you have cowardice, and the other side, you have reckless, sometimes also translated as rashness. And you want to aim for the mean, that is courage. So you don't want to be reckless, you don't want to be cowardice. And he describes cowardice as simply the fear overcomes you. You have too much fear, to put it simply. So, and that to have too much fear then repels you from the appropriate action in the moment. So, you flee in the moment of possible triumph. In military, battle, you actually flee instead of stay put or advance. And then recklessness would be something like, this is often pictured in World War I movies, where you're literally just charging machine guns to get mowed down. Or there's a movie, War Horse. I don't know if you've seen that, Thomas, but there's a movie, War Horse, and it's a World War I movie, and it's basically follows a horse. It's a good movie, but in the very beginning, you have the British are lined up. It's actually kind of a good picture of how, like, you can have the appearance of courage, but it's actually terribly reckless, largely due to ignorance. But they in the early part of World War I, the British were still thinking in their traditional mode of warfare. You dress up nice, you get on your horse, you charge. There's a certain beauty in a cavalry charge. Like, have you ever seen that? Sometimes in France they do this. I think every year they do a traditional cavalry charge. You watch it, it's like, wow, that's amazing. Right. So there's something beautiful in that. But they line up and then they charge a few machine gun nests that German machine gun nests, and they're just like mowed down, like just eliminated, destroyed. Right. And that would be an example where, like, the appearance of this beautiful courage is actually just utter recklessness, because their whole unit was wiped out in the moment, in the matter of minutes. So that's one, but also like Battle Gallipoli. What is that movie? Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to go on that, but that would be, I think, a good description of a type of recklessness where you have no fear at all. Sometimes based on ignorance, sometimes because you're being irrational, and So anyway, those are you got cowardice and you got recklessness, and then the middle you shoot for courage, which does not eliminate fear, but it in a way it harnesses the fear. The fear kind of boosts the spirit, but then it's controlled rationally with reason and prudence, and then directed properly to a good end.
Well, hey, everybody, consider this your official invite to join us here in Ogden, Utah for our annual New Christendom Press Conference this June 12th to the 14th. We're going to be having a great time. Lots of great speakers, live episode of the King's Hall, live episode of Haunted Cosmos. I'll be putting on a concert, a singles mixer, a pastor's breakfast, a business mixer, a VIP hangout. We've got it all. And you need to go to newchristendompress.com/2025, link in the description, to get tickets and more information. We hope to see you there. What are you waiting for? Real strength starts with honoring God's creation. Mount Athos Performance crafts pure, nutrient-dense products from their family farm to your home using goat milk protein and mineral-rich ingredients without chemicals or shortcuts. Every formula reflects their commitment to faith, purity, and strength. Fuel your pursuit of excellence and get 20% off your order at athosperform.com when you use code NCP20. Summers Pet Treats makes all-natural dog treats using high-quality, human-grade ingredients.
Every ingredient is carefully selected for a specific nutritional value, which means they're healthy.
Ben, are you eating the treat?
Yeah, dude, I got that dog in me.
I don't think that's what they meant by human-grade ingredients, but hey, if you want to support a Christian-owned business that believes in the Dominion mandate, then go pick up some healthy dog treats at summerspetTreats.com.
And use code NCP10 at checkout. That's summerspetTreats.com and use code NCP10.
Get that dog in you.
Yeah, so there's all kinds of ways that courage does not manifest. There's actually few ways that it does. And that's why we're talking about all these other ways. So for instance, one of the things I mentioned was about the gods and then animals. And Aristotle talks about this elsewhere. He mentions, for instance, that man is a political animal. And if you ever find a man outside of political society, he's either a beast or a god. He's a beast because he doesn't know how to organize, or he's a god, he doesn't need anything else to sustain himself. And the same thing with courage. The gods can't be harmed in Greek thought, and even in Christian thought, other than the incarnation, if you could just hold off on the incarnation for a minute. But God can't be harmed. Therefore, the question comes, can God have courage? And other than the incarnation, if we hold to this definition, then no, God can't have courage because he can't be harmed. So you have to be able to fear. You have to be afraid of something, but move forward toward the good nonetheless in order to be showing courage. And if you want to see a Greco-Roman interpretation of this, you can watch the movie Troy. I think it was the early 2000s when it was made with, who is the main actor? Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
And there's two scenes in that movie. The one that's the very beginning where he is called upon to go fight this gigantic man, and a child comes to wake him up, and Achilles is getting on his armor, and the kid says, I wouldn't want to go fight him. He's all afraid. And Achilles says, that's why no one would remember your name. You know, everyone knows that line. Well, Achilles is going to face this terrible fear. No one else would stand in front of this man, kind of like David and Goliath. Goliath went out to challenge the armies, and nobody would go for fear. Those men were not showing courage because of fear. David went in confidence in the Lord. So maybe David was afraid, maybe not, but that was probably, there was a little bit of fear there, but he was able to move forward. And the other time in the movie Troy that illustrates this is when Achilles is talking to Briseis inside his tent, and she is like chastising him for his brutality or something like this. And he says, the gods, this is his line in the movie, the gods envy us, he says. This is like the Greco-Roman pagan worldview. The gods envy us because of the momentary short nature of our lives that can end. It makes everything more beautiful, everything more important, everything more special. I don't know what else he exactly says there, but because of the brevity of our life, the senses are heightened. and we're able to sacrifice ourselves in a way that the gods aren't. So he's saying, I think there's something here. The gods in the Greco-Roman worldview can't show some virtues. Zeus could never be courageous. Zeus could never be virtuous in this manner. In fact, like you said, Stephen, the word is Andrea, which is close to aner, which is the word for man. So it doesn't mean women can't be courageous also. It's just very close to the word for man. And this is an extremely important point to make with courage. It's right in this Aristotelian mean, but it's also in a mean between gods and beasts. We humans are right there. And so courage is a distinctly human trait, and it's something that therefore humans should be cultivating. Do you get the point, the connection there? I think that's super important. We don't think of cultivating virtues anymore. Like, I'll just be courageous whenever it calls upon, like circumstances call upon me to do it. But we should be preparing ourselves for those moments through studies of virtue, through models of virtue in books and movies, and through, I think, philosophic contemplation when you have the time and listening to a podcast like this.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the theological question of whether God can have or has courage, it also raises the question as to whether Adam in his original state would have had courage.
Yeah.
So in a state of innocence, is there virtue of courage, or is that introduced post fall? And I think I've always thought that this sort of question is actually important because it speaks to what we are as natural beings, as we are as created. Are things, is something introduced post fall, and so it's in a way like you might call it adventitious virtue. It's something like medicine. Like, so if there was no sickness before the fall, then you wouldn't need doctors. And
what
so,
do you mean by adventitious? What does that word mean?
I mean something like introduced from the outside, like it's native or natural. So like in a way, the Gospels is sort of is adventitious in a way because it's not inherent to nature. Like there's no inherent way it means to salvation. So salvation had to be an act of God that was introduced into creation post creation. And so that's basically what adventitious means. It's an old, fancy word. But if you read scholastic theology, you'll see the word.
Clearly I don't need to brush up on that. No, but this is interesting because what you're saying is that prior to the fall and after the fall, maybe there are some things some virtues, some ways of being man that maybe didn't exist prior that now do, and they're good ways. I think maybe courage could have existed before the fall, but I'm just speculating. Like maybe Adam could have been harmed. I mean, Satan was there in the form of the serpent. And so there had to be some kind of fortitude where he confronts. But also, this is a totally ignorant situation. Like Eve and Adam, I don't think, maybe you know differently. Did they have an understanding of who they were confronting? I mean, would fear have arisen in them when confronting Satan in that moment?
Yeah, I tend to think yes. Yeah, I mean, like you said, if we say that there is a potential of harm, which clearly there was because they harmed themselves by disobedience. Yeah, right. So I think that, it strikes me that there would be a sense of fear. It fits pretty much all the definitions we're talking about. And I think we should remind ourselves that like the impulses of our nature are not in themselves bad. And actually when rightly ordered, direct us to are good. So if like hunger is a signal that you need to eat, I think that Adam and Eve would have had a feeling of hunger that signals I need food. So I think that sometimes we Christians nowadays tend to think that like emotions and like these sort of spontaneous impulses that we experience are like post-fall in some way, that if we weren't fallen, we wouldn't experience these things. But I think that those are just the way we're created. Just as animals have their own impulses that lead them to do different things, we have a sort of our soul will signal to us these things, and they'll direct us to our good. And it strikes me that fear is one of those things. I mean, certainly that they were to fear God. So I think that's probably, at the very least, shows that there would be a sort of fear before God, and then also before
True.
probably other
True.
creatures as well. But I guess it strikes me that, I think, that Adam was supposed to kill the serpent. Like that was, and that would probably that would have involved fear. It would have involved action. It would have involved like rightly regulated. For him, I wonder if actually, I guess we could speculate as to whether their encounter with the serpent was an act of sort of cowardice. I don't know. I've never thought of it before. Literally asking the question for the first time.
Well, if it is just like speculating here, if this is accurate, then part of our repentance and part of the restoration of the image of God in us has to be a restoration of the courage that our first father didn't show.
Yeah.
So we are basically having to show courage, and specifically a sort of spiritual courage, like our courage before our first opponent in the garden, where Adam didn't show courage. We will, against the one he didn't show courage in front of, we will also. Now we do this underneath Christ, empowered by the Holy Spirit. But the point is, I think this is something deep. Like courage is not this, oh yeah, we'll do that if we're ever in war one day, or if ever someone ever wants to like mug my wife, I'm going to stand up, like, okay. But there's other ways of showing courage at a more fundamental level that's closer to the nature of our very being and our restoration in Christ.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's important to emphasize that, because that there is something that the virtue of courage is not simply post-fall. I think is important to emphasize, because then that means that grace actually restores courage to its proper place, instead of thinking that grace will kind of eliminate it. So this is why I stress so much in my Christian nationalist stuff that like grace does not eliminate nations, or it doesn't demand multiculturalism, because actually naturally we are to be, our good by nature is best achieved when we're among a sort of homogenous culture. So grace does not destroy that, because that's natural to us as created. And so once you say that actually courage is a virtue that should be part of should spring from our natural constitution, then grace would not eliminate it. It would perfect it. It would restore it. And so there isn't that tendency. And I think this is why some people, the people who in the tradition, to my knowledge, who are more willing to read Aristotle with profit, are willing to
rather than
more,
just throw him away because it's not in the Bible or something.
Yeah, rather than just like type in, give me, like in a chat GPT, give me spicy or Aristotle quotes, and then post them on Twitter.
Yeah.
You know, a guy in particular who did that. But
spicy Aristotle.
Yeah, and it turns out it wasn't even Aristotle. So, but anyway, I won't say who that is, but people might know. Where was I? I don't know what I was talking about now. Anyway, no, yeah, there's just that tendency to do that. But this is what I was getting at. So like people who are willing to say, yeah, these virtues, and maybe read Aristotle, Cicero, whatever, they're also more willing to say that the pre-fall world would have been in a way nearer to our world than what many people think. So they would, like Aquinas and many people in the Reformed tradition thought that you would actually hunt for meat. Like there would be beasts that would not be appropriate for domestication.
Are you talking about before the fall or
before
in
the
heaven?
fall? Yeah.
Okay.
So if Adam had not fallen, someone like Aquinas would say that actually you would eat flesh, or you would eat meat. And so that means you would fight off beasts, and you would kill beasts, and you'd cook them and all that.
Yeah.
So people like Aristotle, like Bavinck says that surprisingly, I don't know if he's right about this, but I think historically Bavinck gets some things wrong. But he does say, he says the majority of the Reformed writers on the pre-fall world, when they sort of think about what would have been, they say that actually there would have been hunting of animals. So there would have been animal death before the fall, at the very least at the hands of man for meat. But anyway, so I'm not going to like argue for this or that position, but I think there is a tendency to be like, okay, courage is something about man. There is a manliness. Like, what is masculinity? Why are men naturally created stronger than women? Well, there has to be something about that design. Why are men more given over sort of victory mindset over to, and you can think of theological reasons for that as well, but are there earthly reasons for that? Is it triumphing over an animal for food? Like that would be a clear example of courage. Your people or family need to survive, need to live. Our bodies require sustenance, and meat or protein is an essential part of that. And so you facing fear and courageously killing a beast such that they can feed is a good act. It's a good courageous act. So anyway,
Well, that's interesting to me though, because today we live in a world where we don't do that anymore. We don't hunt for our food. I mean, unless you just want to hunt because you like hunting, and then even then you have this long range gun, or you use a really nice compound bow, or some people use recurve. But my point is, we live in a world that's like you mentioned World War One. One of the horrors of World War One and Two was that it was the age of the machine, and it took away. And people talk about this who went through those wars. It took away some of this direct confrontation of the prior battles, where it required you to face your enemy like a man, to fight, to exhibit courage and valor. And you would think, if I die, at least I'm going to die running toward the enemy. Whereas in reality, you're just bombed, or you're gassed, or now a drone comes and just destroys your life, and you're just sitting there. And there's no courage in that. Now we civilians watching this may think, oh, those people are so brave. But people who are there will tell you often, or at least they will report and say, this is maddening, because it strips the human of the virtue. So I'm not going to explore that more, but my point is, we're living in a time where, by default of some technologies that we have, courage is less and less required for us to be men as men. So one of my questions, we don't have to answer this now if you don't know, or if I don't know, but what are some ways we can be courageous now in real ways? And I mean, I think I was thinking about this earlier. One is, I think speaking truth, telling the truth requires courage. So telling the truth today can get you harmed. And we can go into exploring why that is or how that is. But telling the truth in many epochs in history could get you harmed. But especially today, especially online, and especially on a given range of topics. The truth of Christianity is always offensive to some people. The exclusiveness of Christ is offensive. It could get you harmed in many countries today, and it can get you harmed in America by upholding certain truths about male and female, certain truths about reality, different how people interact. I'll just put it that way: how different peoples interact. And if you're going to speak about this, in other words, truth is kind of like the final battlefield. We don't have the battlefield anymore of you going and fighting with a sword in front of someone, and you have this courage that you've worked up since your youth, and now you're displaying it. Well, you have to show courage today on the battlefield of truth. And it requires a lot of fortitude, I would say. It requires fortitude just to do things that are traditional. Like, I've seen women who dress very modestly and have lots of children, and you do that and you go out in public, people will mock you and shame you for living that sort of lifestyle. And there's pressure. And there can be social harm. There can be other forms of, like, it's just fear. Like, you're afraid. It doesn't have to be physical, like someone's going to chop your arm off. But there are other types of injury. And Joseph Piper talks about this. It can be any sort of injury, like psychological injury, emotional injury, although he's not talking about emotional abuse, some of the psychological words we use today. But anyway, so there's courage, I think, that's still required in many ways today. even though it's not the knight in shining armor sort of courage. And C.S. Lewis talked about this, and so did Chesterton and others, that we should teach kids the old tales of chivalry, of fairy tales, because they need to learn that dragons are real and how to fight them, because there are many sorts of dragons today that need fighting, even though it doesn't just look like some serpent over there, and it's different. But you still need courage to face these things that are very harmful.
Yeah, I think on this side, on this question of like what happened, what about today, is one thing we have not mentioned yet is that courage, as perhaps more than most of the other virtues, is tied to public praise and blame or shame. A lot of, because courage tends, not always, but tends to be a very public act. So certainly within the military, you get medals and you get recognition. You can wear the hat that says I was in World War II or Vietnam, and people come up to you and say thank you for your service. When I would be in uniform, and go to breakfast. People would buy me breakfast all the time. Things like that would happen. And so there's a type of praise and blame that's attached to courage. And this is where, and that's good, right? It reinforces it. It means that you can suppress fear. You can have what Aristotle emphasizes, a noble death. And Aquinas mentions that as well regarding, martyrdom. But it means that you can have a noble death because it's recognized as noble by others. And so you can face death and actually die, and that's preferable than you being cowardly. And so there's a type of social, not pressure, but a social factor, for lack of a better word, that actually encourages that type of nobility. But this is where things can go wrong at the same time. If you're simply saying let's say you're in a sort of debate with someone and you just say what everyone else is thinking, and then you're declared the sort of winner, and then, oh, you're so courageous for confronting that, even though you're just saying what everyone already believes.
Right.
It doesn't take a lot of courage to simply speak the social dogma.
Right.
But it's reinforced by society, and it's labeled as courageous. Even though there's no cost for you saying it at all. There's no fear involved with saying it at all. If there's no fear, if there's no possibility of harm, then it's actually not courage. Perhaps you're saying what is true, but it's not courage. So, but
I
the
saw
the
something
point
recently about
yeah,
this.
go ahead.
So I saw someone, I think it was on Facebook, posted a picture. I think it was AI, but it was in church looking at a woman. Her hair was shaved right here, but it was long on top, and she had tattoos and earrings, and she was wearing a sort of a tank top. Her arms were tattooed, and the question was, would this woman be welcomed in your church? And of course, it had 20,000 likes or something. Everyone's like, "Yeah, this is great." And I was thinking, this is not edgy. This woman is not edgy. Like, she's protected. In fact, she's probably in charge of your local large HR mega corporation. I mean, she's not an outcast anymore. Maybe at one point 50 years ago she was, but and the reason why everybody likes it, I mean, there's like this social cultural power behind accepting this woman. It's no longer courageous to look like that. It's no longer courageous to be a church that welcomes that. I'm not saying you shouldn't. You should welcome those people, but you're not courageous for doing so anymore. You would be courageous if you turned her away because she's a sinner, and like an unrepentant sinner. Okay. And I'm not saying do that. I'm just saying courage is not welcoming this. We're so far beyond that moment in history, at least the history of our nation. Courage would be welcoming someone who's actually an outcast in our society today, and I'll leave that to your imagination who those people are, because it's not even proper to mention who those people are. That's how dangerous it is right? You have to have courage just to mention who the actual outcasts are. Like, for instance, if that person would have made an image of a guy with a swastika tattoo on his head right there and said, "Would this person?" That person's account would have been shadow banned or reported. I mean, and the church that welcomes that young man would be, they'd be in the newspapers, right? It totally, they might be harmed, right? They might actually experience harm for accepting that person. That would require courage. Now, again, I'm not saying that you should just go and welcome either one camp, all right? But I'm saying one requires courage, one doesn't. And we have this social expectation among us where we pat ourselves on the back and say, we're being courageous, we're being charitable, we're expressing all of these virtues, when in reality, we're not. And the reason we're not is, for courage at least, this is not harming us. There's no fear in doing this course of action. Although it might be good to welcome the sinner and talk with them, it doesn't require of us actual courage.
Right. But as you said, we've been convinced that it is courageous. And that's one of those delusions of, I think, our modern times.
Yeah.
When we say something that everyone also basically believes, or it's the only thing acceptable to say, and then we think we're being courageous when we say it.
Yeah.
And
right.
I think social media does play up those dynamics a bit, because you say something, let's say it's like, I'm against racism, and like you'll get a bunch of people that say, oh wow, that's great, good job, you're so courageous, pastor. Right. And then you get like the handful of guys who say like, you just hate white people or something like that, whatever it is, or shut up Jew, or whatever they say.
Right.
They'll say something like that, and then they'll feel like, oh, I'm being courageous because these random anonymous guys said nasty things about me. It's just it's an utter delusion,
right?
And
right.
but it's very effective, because it creates a system of praise and blame. And if you're praised, then it feels like it's courageous. And there's always like it's part of the it's overused, but post-war consensus is an aspect of like we're always like a moment away from Nazism returning in a flash. Like that's kind of the mindset. And because of that, there is like this looming invisible enemy that's just going to appear. And so you have to beat it. You have to suppress it. You have to defeat it. And so there is like this, we're always continuously fighting the Nazis, but of course, that's all a delusion. But then whenever you uncover the Nazi and you destroy him, you feel like you're, a soldier on the battlefield in France. Right. And it's courageous, but it's all, I said, it's nonsense. But
there was a pastor recently online who, this is maybe a few weeks ago, we already mentioned it in one episode, but he came out online, I think it was Owen Strachan, and he said, I always stand with Israel. And you could just hear the moral fortitude in his voice. I mean, it was just dripping with like valor and courage. Yeah. And I'm thinking, here's this guy, I don't know, where is he? Like in Oklahoma or someplace? Like he's like in the middle of America, surrounded by, he's a pastor or a theologian or something. Like, dude, you're not standing with Israel in any material way whatsoever. There is no harm that you're in. There's no harm that you're going to suffer because you're standing with it. Like, you can stand with Israel if you want, but don't act like it's this morally courageous thing to do. Go in Palestine or something and go stand with them if you want to stand with them. I mean, that would be the courageous thing to do. Go in some Muslim country and say you stand with Israel. That would require courage. But standing here in like the Heartland, Bible Belt, Middle America, and just like beat your chest like, I will always be with Israel. Like, all right, man, calm down, dude. This is not valorous or courageous or high-minded or something. You're not sacrificing your career by saying this. In fact, you may get more funding because of this. I mean, who knows what good things will come your way by saying this, right? I think the saying is, without Jews, you lose. So, if you're going to attack Jewish people, you put yourself in harm's way often. This is what happens to a lot of people in history. If you come out against them, you're going to be suffering harm. But in supporting them, you're maintaining some kind of 20th century political dogma. And I think a lot of times people say, like the governor of Texas said this. He was like recently. Like and the same thing with the governor of Arkansas. I'm like, we support it. We just passed in Israel. I'm like, what does Arkansas have to do with this? I saw actually in Korea, South Korea, they just opened a museum for Jews, for a Holocaust museum, and I think, what does South Korea have to do with the Holocaust? Now look, should we forget history and all this stuff? No, but like what is going on? Like I don't think they're trying to think that they're being courageous, though. I didn't look at the article, but my point is, supporting Jews is a social dogma that's widely accepted among the most powerful members and political leaders in the world. So if you come out and express sympathy with Jews, that may be the right or wrong thing to do for you or for your country or whatever, but don't act like it's this courageous thing, because the most powerful institutions in the world do the same thing.
Yeah. Again, it's like our praise and blame system is so skewed that it like convinces people psychologically that they are being courageous when they're really just doing what everyone already agrees with. Like, and then they praise them for it. And it's ridiculous. And actually, in a way, like that, there's something in itself good about that. Like, we would want a society where you saying what is true is supported and saying, yeah, that's right. Right. Like that there can be an element of praise in saying what is true, and that being socially acceptable and everyone agree with you. That's a vision of Christian nationalism, that we would say Christ is Lord, and it wouldn't be a courageous statement. It would just and yet everyone around you would say amen. Like that's a good thing. But let's just not call it courage. Like, courage is, again, there's potential harm, there's danger, there's a moral choice for a good.
Well, I think our discussion here just backs up the point, though, that one of the main ways you can show courage today is on the battlefield of truth.
Yeah.
So we don't always have opportunities to go fight our enemies today physically and with violence in the military. And even when we do, because of technology, the virtue of courage is often taken away from us. We're robbed of it before we get a chance to show it. Well, where can you show courage today? You can show courage in not going along with the current social dogma, in not mouthing it, in not repeating it, and not nodding your head to it. You can show courage in speaking truth in public, online, to your friends, in your institutions. The battlefield of truth, I think, is primarily where today courage is being displayed.
Yeah, and I mean, this fits with our discussion of not anger, but anger. And how we were trying to argue that anger itself can actually be a good thing. You're facing injustice. There's indignation, and it's an impulse to correct or right some wrong, and that takes courage to do that. In many cases, certainly it takes the courage to do that today. But we have to, and we've said this so many times, but like, it just has to be repeated, because maybe that one guy is watching this and hasn't watched the other things we've said. But don't forget that there is courage and then there's recklessness. There's courage and then there's recklessness.
Yeah.
We tend to, I understand, in our day, like we often use the sort of metaphor of shooting an arrow and hitting the target. In our day, you kind of have to aim towards recklessness. And that's partly as a correction because we're disposed towards cowardice. So, but at the same time, you don't want to overshoot and hit recklessness. And we've emphasized before that there are some people who courage is actually them saying something true outright or saying it in their own name. That's courageous. I think for someone like myself in my situation, it would be cowardly for me to just not say things at all, or kind of be anonymous, because I can get away with it. I think, anyway, so far I've gone away with it. But if you're a young guy, if you're not financially, you can't handle some of the harms that come your way or the dangers, then courage for you is not the same for Wolf. It's different. So, we have to understand that situation. Don't let anger or some sort of spirit push you to being reckless. If losing your job and anyway, whatever it is, everyone makes their choices. But I just think that's just really important to emphasize that yes, things are messed up. Yes, there's grounds for anger. Yes, there's grounds for action and speaking truth. But there's also a mean that is particular to each individual given their situation.
Yeah,
And
there's a balance.
don't slip into recklessness. But again,
There's a balance.
But we are as a Christian culture in our time, we tend to be on the cowardly side. And there is a correction that needs to happen, but that's particular to each person.
Yeah, there's a balance, and sometimes I think you're right. We've been more cowardly, and so getting back to the middle is going to require more effort than just reaching the middle, but kind of going a little further so we actually make where we're landing for. If that makes sense, you have to overcorrect or kind of shoot high. It's kind of like windage.
Yeah, right.
Right? If you aim straight at the target, but the wind's blowing this way, you need to aim a little bit this way to hit right on. But one way you can do this, I think, is to learn to cultivate courage. And you can cultivate courage by facing your fears. I know this sounds silly, okay? It sounds psychobabbly, but whatever things that you have fear of, like not just, I'm afraid of the dark, but like fears of somehow suffering injury, physical, social injury, relational, financial, like this requires risk. It requires some daring, but you need to do a little bit at a time, like start small. And this is why in the old world, people would train themselves in virtue. Virtue is not something that you just think and pray for and you just go do it and it doesn't work out and you think, oh, I'm just a sinner. You train yourself in virtue because it's like shooting at a mark and you're trying to hit. And you do this so that when the stakes get bigger, and they will at some point in your life, either just because of age and responsibility or because of some event that happens and suddenly responsibility is thrust upon you, you have been training yourself to show courage so that you're not reckless, nor are you cowardly. And what recklessness looks like is, so I know there's some people that they can only be 100% or 0% on something. If they speak the truth, it's going to be all in your face and really hard, and it's going to be ugly and angry. And because of that, because that's sinful and it's going to wreck the relationship, you just don't say anything. You just don't. It's either I get in their face or I do nothing. And you need to be practicing the ability to do something in the middle here. And something toward the middle is better than not. And you just start a little by little facing your fears. If it's like your boss or something is like telling you that you need to do something, it's just not working out. But if you speak up, he's going to get angry and he may fire you and that would injure you. So you don't say anything. So you grumble and like bad things fester because you're not taking action. Right. And so having courage in this instance to put yourself out there, put yourself at risk by offending your boss and possibly getting fired. I'm saying, I don't know if this is proper courage, but I'm just trying to give an example here that might be relatable. And you need to be able to work yourself up to that situation, right? Where you don't just submit and be quiet and let the bad stuff go on or explode on your boss. That's reckless, right? You need to be able to approach your boss and stand upright and speak the truth about the situation that's going on that he may not be aware of or whatever, and speak truth. And that's a part of being courageous, I think, too, which we haven't mentioned, we kind of hinted at, is bad things may befall you still. Like just because you were courageous doesn't mean it's going to work out.
Yeah.
Like there is real possibility of harm. It's not fake possibility of harm. And it's not like, oh, well, there was, but you were courageous and therefore it worked out. No. There's a scene I keep thinking of when I'm studying courage in the movie Band of Brothers, also the book Band of Brothers. It's the scene, so if you don't know, it's World War II, Easy Company, they're paratroopers, I forgot what exactly they called themselves. They're airborne. I think it was 101st Airborne.
Yeah.
And they jump into Germany and they're fighting the Germans. There's a scene where there's a berm, sort of like a small hill, and the Germans are shooting at them, and Easy Company is trying to shoot back. And there's one guy, his name's Private Blythe. It's at night, and the bullets are coming in, the missiles or whatever are coming in, and he's in that hole, and he's so afraid, and he can't get out of the hole. And then I think it was Captain Winters at that point. He was a captain. He came up and he just stood over the hole. The bullets are whizzing by him and trees are exploding all around him. And Private Blythe looks up at him and he just sees this man of courage standing there, even though death is all around. And he says, "Come on, Blythe, shoot the enemy. Get up, Blythe. Let's go. Don't be afraid. Or if you are afraid, overcome that fear and fight anyway." And there's a particular scene in that movie too, where I think it was Lieutenant Spears or Captain Spears. He talked to the same Private Blythe, and Private Blythe said, I can't fight. I'm afraid. And Spears said, "We're all afraid. We're all afraid. It's not that I don't have fear. We're all afraid. We just overcome the fear and push forward." So, that's how courage works. And some men, even though they do that, they get shot. The bomb explodes and there they go. So it's real fear, real possibility of injury physically, again, or financially, or socially, or mentally, or whatever. You're really risking things. And you're being courageous. And you might think, well, if I'm courageous and it doesn't work out, that was a bad risk, right? I shouldn't have risked that. Actually, according to Western philosophy, you should show courage because it's the right thing to do. You have a fear of injury. You move forward toward the good. Justice demands that Blythe get up and shoot back. Even if he dies in the attempt, he should have done it. Even if he fails, he should have done it. And this is the part where courage rises a little higher and becomes valor. It becomes glory. It becomes honorable and praiseworthy. When you do something toward the good that required overcoming fear of injury and you succeed, good. Good for you. If you fail, it's not good. We wish you would have not failed. But you tried anyways, and it was an honorable attempt. Not to have done it would have been dishonorable. So it's the probability of success isn't the question. It's, ought this thing to be done in this moment? If yes, then you should overcome that fear and do it.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a few things. One, when we covered the Anabasis, which again is available on Supercast, Cyrus is killed fairly early on in the book. I believe it was book 1, right? At the end of book 1, he's dead.
I think so, yeah.
But then in book 2, he's praised and lauded and like the perfect friend and this and that. And you could say that he was reckless in a way, but no one actually described his death in the battle as being like that. And so, but they would honor his virtue of courage and all his other virtues. And so that I think that kind of speaks to what you said, is that, was he reckless for dying? Well, no, he was courageous, but he happened to die. The other thing I'm thinking about is the end of the Declaration of Independence. It says, "We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." And we read that, we memorize that, and we think it sounds nice, but they are putting their sacred honor at stake. Like if they lose, there's a sense in which they lose that honor.
Right.
But it's one of those weird, seemingly contrary things. It's like we're being courageous and potentially losing our sacred honor. But nevertheless, that's kind of what we're getting at here, is that you, in an act of great struggle, you are in a way knowing that if you lose, most likely the victors are going to sort of dishonor you in some way. And yet it's an act of courage to put that at stake. And then I think perhaps the writer's declaration was they were alluding to Cicero's On Duties, Book 1. And so this is what it says here. He says, "It is our duty then to be more ready to endanger our own than the public welfare, and to hazard honor and glory more readily than any other advantages." So I wonder if they're kind of appealing to Cicero in the declaration, but we have to be more ready to hazard our honor and glory than to sacrifice the public welfare. Like we are to, in the name of the public good, in the name of the good, we are going to hazard our honor and glory. So it's one of those seemingly contrary things, and yet it's if you're not willing, I mean, to lose your fortune's one thing. To lose your life in a noble death is higher than that. But to lose all that plus any sort of honor that you would have moving forward in the immediate history is even higher than all those. So,
yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking of the paradox. There's a paradox here in you're risking your honor for something that's honorable. It's paradoxical. It's hard to understand. And there's a passage that I always remember from G.K. Chesterton in his book, Orthodoxy. I want to quote this from Chesterton. He says, "Take the case of courage. No quality has ever so much addled the brains and tangled the definitions of merely rational sages. Courage is almost a contradiction in terms. It means a strong desire to live, taking the form of a readiness to die." Let me repeat that, just one phrase there. It means a strong desire to live, taking the form of a readiness to die. Let me continue. "He that will lose his life, the same shall save it. This is not a piece of mysticism for saints and heroes. It is a piece of everyday advice for sailors or mountaineers. It might be printed in an Alpine guide or a drill book. This paradox is the whole principle of courage, even of quite earthly or brutal courage. A man cut off by the sea may save his life if he will risk it on the precipice." He's on a cliff and there's the sea and then maybe there's danger on this side. He can save it if he'll risk it. He can only get away from death by continually stepping within an inch of it. A soldier surrounded by enemies, if he is to cut his way out, needs to combine a strong desire for living with a strange carelessness about dying. He must not merely cling to life, like Private Blythe did, for then he will be a coward and will not escape. He must not merely wait for death, for then he will be a suicide and will not escape. He must seek his life in a spirit of furious indifference to it. He must desire life like water and yet drink death like wine. No philosopher, I fancy, has ever expressed this romantic riddle with adequate lucidity, and I certainly have not done so, but Christianity has done more. It has marked the limits of it in the awful graves of the suicide and the hero, showing the distance between them who dies, him who dies for the sake of living, and him who dies for the sake of dying. End quote. Long quotes in Orthodoxy. I think about this often, though. Courage requires a furious indifference to life, and yet you desire life at the same time. So you want life, but you know that in order to keep it, you must risk it. And you're continually stepping within an inch of death in order to save your life. And he quotes Jesus here too. He who would save his life must lose it. And the other places in the Bible, it talks about the saints, the martyrs, they did not love their lives unto death. There's a heroic courage at the root of Christianity. And it's most foremost with Christ, where he laid his life down so that he would take it up again. And we follow him likewise. I mean, this is I think primarily what courage is. It's not like I hate life and I want to throw it away. That's suicide. Jesus wasn't a suicide. And in fact, I forgot where I just read this, but the early Christian martyrs forbade each other, like the ones in charge, I'm not sure exactly who, maybe the bishops or somebody, forbade voluntarily submitting yourself to be a martyr. You weren't to do this. So there's no recklessness in death here. It's not courageous. If you're brought to be a martyr, if someone captures you, then show yourself the man in that moment. But what we're saying here is that courage requires not a throwing away of life, nor a clinging to it at all costs. In both cases, you die. But if you're willing to have life so much and yet also risk it, you may just keep your life. So you have to be willing to lay it down or lose it so that you may gain it. And that's at the root, that's at the core of Christianity. So at the core of Christianity, I think, is courage.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. I think we can end with, unless you have something else. We could end it there. We probably should.
Okay.
But I have something else that is less profound than that.
Okay, sure.
That I wanted to talk about. And that is the idea of courage in relation to expediency. And I think this has a sort of practical application that perhaps that's best to end on that. So yeah, we've been reading through Cicero's On Duties or Moral Duties, De Officiis, and his argument is that the moral virtues, when done properly, are always expedient, meaning they always are effective in public affairs or whatever end you're seeking after. And effective doesn't, again, encourage, it could mean that you die, and yet in some sense in the that there's some effective expediency built into that. And I think this is a good way to think practically about how, especially in the truth-telling area, and that is that you have to, when you speak truth, you're seeking to persuade others to assent, adopt that truth as well. And so the goal in mind is that the truth you're affirming is then affirmed by other people. And so then there is a means or mode by which you do that. And so I think where we can define a type of recklessness as you speaking truth in such a way that it is both ineffective and it harms you at the same time. I think that could be a decent definition of recklessness in speaking truth. And I see that a lot online where there is a seemingly courageous attempt to speak truth, and yet it's ineffective and it harms that person. So I think that courage in truth telling, it has an element of expediency in that the way that you say things is tailored to your audience such that they would receive it. And sometimes that's a process. Sometimes it's just simply stating it well, and then they come to adopt it because it's stated well, or perhaps they're persuaded. But I think that's courage. And again, there is a tendency to put like all caps, exclamation point, believe this. Most people aren't persuaded by that sort of rhetoric, and it can be reckless. So I think thinking of how you act in the world, in our world today, you have to then frame it in terms of expediency. You have to know your audience. If they've been watching Fox News for 30, 40 decades, you probably have to approach that person different than someone who's 20, who's been, listening to, Fuentes or whatever. Like you have to think different or approach those people different. And to be a courageous truth teller in that way, you have to include the element of what's effective, what's expedient to the end you're seeking. And that's courage. Whereas just saying it in the most direct, perhaps obnoxious way, even if it's not obnoxious, but the most direct way possible actually can be more reckless. So, yeah. Any thoughts? You have anything else?
Well, as you were talking, I was also thinking about courage. We've been talking about courage, I think, in a way that shows like it's a momentary thing. Like courage for a moment, fortitude for a moment. Like in this instance, I should rise up and show courage. But Joseph Piper and Aristotle talk about endurance. Like you have to endure sometimes also. So, and I think endurance can, so like we talked about men in battle. Well, what about women? Well, of course, women today are in battle, but but not historically. So, how can women be courageous? The word courage in Greek comes from, or it is Andrea, which comes from aner. It's cognate. And what about women? Well, first of all, I think the word courage in Greek is feminine. I think one guy pointed this out. It's a feminine word. I don't know if that means women can be courageous too, because it's a feminine word. But my point is to broach this subject. Can women be courageous? And I think probably yes in 1,000 ways, but the courage doesn't have to look like a man's courage. And one problem that we have in Western philosophy today is that we flatten everything and say, women could be strong too. Women could be like, well, yes, of course. But a man's strength and a woman's strength, they're not just different in volume or intensity, they're different in their character. Women's virtues. Women can be noble and men can be noble. Women can be charitable and men can be charitable. But because of our station and our characters and society and whatever else, that doesn't mean that I'm more than you are. But it's like I'm different than you are, even though the characteristic has some overlap. So with courage, and the nature of courage being a thing that you have to endure hardship. You endure some fear that you have to overcome. For instance, the Bible says, oh gosh, I'm forgetting it now. It talks about a woman submitting to her husband and not fearing, not being afraid. There's a lot of talk about this with women. Like, what if my husband's abusive and all this stuff? And of course, that's like, books are written about this. I'm sorry to broach the subject at the end, but I think it's important. Like, how does a woman show courage? Well, normally it's not just like moments of courage where she has to defend herself, like that Shiloh lady did, where she like had a moment where someone's following her around in a park and she rises up and screeches at them or whatever. That's a moment, but normally for women, I think you have circumstances befall you because of your family, because of society, because of the husband who's leading your family, and you have to show courage in front of your children. Like, hey, this is an unstable moment. I'm afraid, but I have to face it nobly and with courage, and not cower in fear. If my husband loses his job or he dies, like I just listened to a Dave Ramsey bit where some lady called in and her husband had died and she can't afford her bills anymore and the house is going to be repossessed and the bank already took her car and she can't get to work and it's just, and you can hear the fear in her voice. Well, Dave Ramsey, one of his co-hosts, was telling her, hey, have courage because your children are watching you. Right? So don't cower in fear. I mean, they're going to help. They ended up helping her, by the way. They helped her amazingly. They did a great job. Like financially, they helped her. They didn't just give her advice. They gave her financial assistance. But they were just telling her, be courageous. So there is sort of a courage that is particular to women in their station. And I'm talking about historic station now. Women today they're in the workforce. They're on their own. They don't need a man. Sure. That's one way to go about it. But traditionally, historically, prototypically in our past, or whatever the word is, women have had to show courage in many ways. I think of, what was the woman's name? Andromache, Hector's wife. Hector had to show courage to go out there and fight Achilles. That was a lot of courage. But Andromache also had to show courage in knowing she's facing a fearful situation and she has to push through it. She has to survive this. She has to move through it, not in a cowardly way, not in a servile way, but in a way that befits her station and is noble and upholds true and good things as much as she can. That's a fearful situation she's facing. Suicide is an option, right? Taking your life is an option. She didn't pursue that, nor did she recklessly throw her life away. This is what Chesterton was talking about. But there's courage for a woman in many situations, even in war, even if she's not a combatant in war, but also in domestic life and in many other situations. And
Yeah,
I think,
this-
sorry, just one more. I think it's also a characteristic of endurance for a woman. Whereas a man shows courage in moments, a woman's courage, she has to call upon it for long periods of time, just by nature of her situation in life.
Yeah, as you're talking, it reminded me of, again, Cicero, and he has this line that I like. This is in book 1. He says, "We ought to regard loveliness as the attribute of woman and dignity as the attribute of man." And I think when applied to courage, I think you can describe the courage of a woman typically as a sort of lovely courage. I think that kind of gets at what we're talking about. There's a sort of loveliness in the courage. Whereas for men, it's a dignified courage. You know, I don't know how much that helps, but that just helps me kind of categorize the difference there between feminine and masculine courage. There's a loveliness to a womanly courage that's admirable, that's praiseworthy, and then a sort of dignified, stately courage of a man that's also praiseworthy and admirable. So, yeah, that's great. I think this is a great discussion. And yeah, we've almost an hour. I can't see anymore. So an hour and 20 minutes maybe. But you have anything else, or can we end it? Okay, cool. All right. Well, thank everyone for listening. And again, this is kind of a sneak peek or a little peek into what Thomas and I talk about on Politica. So please subscribe there. It's thelonebulwark.supercast.com. For a few dollars, you get not only the episodes that we drop every, I guess about twice a month or more, but also all the old episodes, even what I call the Ars Politica legacy episodes back in the day when we did this from 2020 to 2022, I believe. So
the OG episodes.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again, and I'll see you guys next time.